Welcome to the Nerd Goblin Podcast.
As the lady said, welcome to the third episode of the Nerd Goblin Podcast. My name is Jonathan, and joining me today, as always, are Bill and Guy. We're going to cover some news headlines today, and then dive into our feature, which takes a look at Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and some of the ways you can experience the game. Alright, let's do a little news. Reality gaming has taken another small step towards its inevitable arrival, with Sony's Northwest Studio set to work on, and this is a quote, high-quality Morpheus games. The Morpheus headset is set to launch sometime in the first half of 2016. While E3 will have much more on this front, what do you expect from the initial launch of VR gaming, such as the Oculus Rift, Microsoft's HoloLens, or Sony's Morpheus? Bill?
A lot of hype is probably the shortest answer I could give. I don't really expect much of any kind of new branch of technology to really have a terrific impact on the enjoyment of any medium. Furthermore, there's, some underlying problems with it. It's not necessarily going to be priced competitively, in terms of a standard gamer. So there are also potential health concerns with these things, and I don't know to what degree this is like quackery or conspiracy-minded, paranoia. But, there are some, actual research involved with the notion that the human brain is not designed to perceive all of its visual information in 2D, and ultimately that's really what these are a 2D platform for, creating a 3D image. So, there's going to be a lot of doubt behind its early launch, depending on which perspective you look at it from.
Yeah, hype is probably a good way to put it. I'm more or less in agreement with Bill on this one. For myself personally, I'm not really looking forward to this technology. Maybe it's my age. Maybe it's other issues that I have. For example, Diablo 3. There was an issue I had with that game where just a certain amount of uncontrolled jittering of the screen gave me that sensation of motion sickness. I can't imagine being able to play with these, head devices that show you VR/3D stuff. I can't imagine that's going to agree with me. That notwithstanding, though, I can't foresee the first generation of this stuff being all that impressive, although I haven't experienced it yet. I know some people have had some early releases of the devices and done some reviews and said it's amazing to look at look through them, but I'm not expecting really high I don't have high expectations for the first generation of this technology personally.
Yeah, it's interesting. What Bill said is kind of how I feel about it. It's almost like sitting way too close to the TV to me. And I know there's supposed to be more depth than that, and it's supposed to be a little bit better, but I can't imagine playing a game or doing something with something strapped to my head like that. It just feels like the first step, but eventually, if we're going to have some kind of virtual reality, I don't think it'll be like a helmet.
Well, Google Glass was released, right? I mean, that actually is a thing that's available for retail. And I don't recall ever seeing someone in the wild using one. So, I'm not really getting a lot of feeling for the success of this sort of technology. And I don't know if it's fair to compare it to the Morpheus gaming and the Oculus Rift type of thing, the VR headsets. I'm not sure if that's a fair comparison, but I think people are just generally maybe going to be a little more hesitant to be wearing technology on their head as part of this. And I don't know, maybe people said the same thing about the Sony Walkman, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a fair comparison, the Google Glass versus this VR technology, but if I'm not mistaken, Google just totally scrapped that project, didn't they?
They have definitely reworked it. I don't know for sure if they've pulled sales, but I know they're trying to rework the apps entirely from the ground up. So yeah, it's coming next year. We're going to learn a little bit more about this. We're definitely going to hear a lot about it after E3, and I imagine we'll revisit the topic then. But let's move on. Wired published the first screenshots from the June 10th, 2016 World of Warcraft feature film release. The film's protagonist happens to be an orc. Is this something that you're interested in, or do you find it to be many, many years too late? Guy?
Yeah, what are we, 5-6 years we've been hearing about this, and it's just started going into production now, relatively recently anyway. Yeah, that said, I'm still interested. having been, although not currently, a long-time World of Warcraft player, I can't help but, continue to have interest in both the new expansions for the game and new news about the game, and that includes this potential feature film. I don't know. I was expecting the main characters to, of course, be Alliance characters, probably human, just to be more relatable to the audience. I'm a little surprised that they'd be going with Orc as the main character for a film. But it sounds interesting. I am looking forward to it, and I hope they do it well. I hope it's an entertaining film and, something that would be fun to go see in the theaters.
Yeah, I mean, we all played Warcraft, and I personally, I think that the Orcs had a more agreeable storyline, something that was maybe more genuine and relatable to something, I don't know, I guess from a pure perspective, a more honorable storyline than the humans. There was always some kind of chicanery going on in the human and elven and dwarven storylines. But that said, as far as an entertainment blockbuster or some kind of movie, I'm not really sure what to make of it. I mean, I suppose I'll want to see it just out of kind of a sense of nostalgia, but in terms of actual entertainment value, I don't really have high expectations from it. I mean, looking back, there were a couple of D&D movies that, if I'm not mistaken, they just essentially ended up being, low-profile cable TV replay material that, I watched at least one of them, and it wasn't terribly good. So I don't really have a high level of expectation for this.
I can't imagine that the full-budget feature film that I'm expecting this to be could even be in the same ballpark as those old D&D movies. I did watch both of them. The first one in particular was had a Wayans brother in it, if I'm not mistaken. Man, that was a pile of junk. I'm expecting way more out of this than that. I don't think that this is going to be some silly low-budget movie that's trying to cash in just on its namesake, and I think they're going to try to do it right. But I'm nervous. They could mess it up pretty bad, and it is based on a video game. Just that in and of itself. How many movies have we ever seen based on a video game that were any good? Certainly not the Street Fighter movie. Certainly not the Mario Brothers movie. I don't know. Resident Evil, maybe?
Mortal Kombat, maybe. That was entertaining. You know what I'm most excited about? The orc love scenes. They're going to be great in this movie.
I mean, will that count towards the film rating?
Are you guys serious? Is there actually going to be orc love scenes in this movie?
I hope so. Just for the comedy factor.
I just hope there aren't any gnomes.
Oh gosh, this is going to get dark. Let's move on. We're going to stick with World of Warcraft, though. There's been some, news blips for the game recently. An interesting story popped up on GameSpot about a botting program called Honor Buddy finally being detected by the Warcraft servers after being successfully ran since 2010. Many accounts were banned due to this, some of those accounts being over 10 years old. We all experienced bots and farmers at one point during our MMO days. Explain to the audience a little bit about what that means. Bill?
Yeah, so, just a quick explanation. A bot is, generally speaking, a program that runs and overlays in your computer through while you're playing this game. And basically, so you're not playing the game. The bot will go through some really basic routines for you, and, basically make sure that you're not marked as AFK, and, on a very, very simple level, participate in the gameplay, thus earning you, whether it's, credit for having been present at something, or, in terms of Warcraft, you enter a battlegrounds, and it's, an instance within the game where you're basically earning your PvP credit that lets you get items and such. So this lets you, essentially be on autopilot. It could just be turned on all day, and you wouldn't even have to actually be playing the game. People have been very resentful of these sorts of things because, obviously, number one, it's giving someone credit for something that they didn't actually do. And number two, it's using up a spot, on a roster, that would otherwise be occupied by a productive and active player. So, for one, if you're going up against them, it's no fun because they're basically ducks at the target range, just moving back and forth in very simplistic fashion. Or they end up being your teammate, and, a lot of luck to you and your team's chance of success if you're the one that ends up with more bots on your team. And it actually is kind of widespread.
See, my experience playing a while back in the day was that I didn't notice or run into bots too terribly often. The most that comes to mind for me is Alterac Valley, which was originally, I guess it was 40 versus 40 PvP environment, but it was downgraded, I think, to less players at some point, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, in there you would certainly get a handful of people on each side that were AFK. In the general game world, I didn't really experience it as a problem much. I recall a game, I think it was Dark Age of Camelot, an MMO, where there was XP grinding bots where you could set your character up in an area, and it would just sit there and auto farm for you and just kill everything. I never saw anything that sophisticated or intrusive in World of Warcraft. As far as, the PvP specific bots and AFK farming for honor in the battlegrounds, yeah, it was a bit of a problem. Like I said, I never felt like it was so prolific that it negatively impacted me in a major way, but I noticed it occasionally. We were typically lucky, though, in that we had our own complete groups of players and played together, which solved that problem entirely. That said, regarding the accounts that were banned, I did see that article, I think it was last week, and it was something on the order of 100,000 accounts, which was pretty surprising considering that, if I'm not mistaken, Warcraft has been losing subscribers, so it's interesting that they're still taking that seriously and getting rid of potential paying customers.
Yeah, that's at least 1% of their overall player base they just banned. It's kind of crazy. What do you think about the fact that the bot program was successfully ran for 5 years? The servers didn't detect it until now.
Well, there's certainly a little bit of, conspiracy-minded paranoia that, Blizzard maybe look the other way because they are, in fact, paying customers that are doing this. As to whether or not how I feel about it, I'm not pleased. If I were playing the game, I don't want to know that other people are kind of getting away with stuff. And maybe this is just my own morality and ethics in life. But, I have a problem with that.
This sort of brings up not a direct comparison, but another topic Bill and I were discussing maybe a week ago. It's kind of the moral and ethics of gaming, particularly competitive gaming and PvP playing, as it applied to World of Warcraft when we used to play it a lot. There was this idea that you wouldn't engage in quote-unquote dishonorable activity when doing player versus player combat, in the hopes of, holding up a standard and being representing yourself and your guild in a way that, you'd want people to treat you. This certainly crosses that line of being honorable or ethical in PvP. All you're doing is ruining everyone else's experience around you for, pure selfish gains. I don't know if, you could draw this into that other topic, though, of actually playing and playing in an honorable way, and if that's necessarily an important or realistic argument these days.
Well, the whole botting thing, it gets around, like Bill and you kind of have alluded to, the fact that in these games, these massive online games, the biggest thing that you can do to improve is spend time. Skill matters, but like the free-to-play games now that you can spend money and improve more quickly, it was like that. The more time you spend, the better you're going to be. And, the botting program just gets around that. You can just do what you needed to do while you're sleeping, basically.
So, how healthy is this for the actual gameplay? On one hand, I did mention these people are their customers. They're paying their $15 a month to have a program play for them. And theoretically, at some point, they're actually going to get behind the keyboard themselves and play the game in order to use, whatever it is they've gained. Although there is certainly the underlying notion that they could be doing it to build up the account and then later sell it. In which case, it certainly opens up a whole other can of worms, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's, sort of what I was alluding to is, if it didn't negatively impact everybody else around them, is it really that big of a deal? Like letting people do whatever they want? How letting them play the game how they want to play the game?
I think until we're talking about whether or not, robots are sentient beings, do androids dream of electric sheep kind of thing, yeah, I have a problem with it. It detracts from the online experience of other players. And, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of other things that also do this. Rude people do it, too. and perhaps even worse. But I think you have to consider that the notion of playing a game online, competitively or otherwise, a lot of the added value is achieved from, the interaction with other players, whether it's competitively through PvP or socially. I think that's a lot of the upside of playing an online game, and to essentially automate one end of it. Like, what are we doing? We're having like a crowdsourced AI. It really doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I think that we've covered this well. I don't think any of us think it's a good thing. It's interesting to hear this come up in 2015. It feels like something that was more of an issue in 2007. Let's move on. We have some news out of the UK this week. I believe this company is going to pronounce itself as Unicorn, but it's spelled UNIKRN.com, which is, really alluding to the lack of .com name availabilities right now. You can bet on esports on this website. Specifically right now, you can bet on League of Legends and Counter-Strike matches, with more games soon to come. As part of a promotion, the upcoming MOBA Heroes of the Storm hosted a tournament that was shown live on an ESPN affiliate channel. How big do you see esports getting? Okay.
First of all, I assume you wouldn't have brought up this topic if it wasn't something that you could do from the US, and that being the case, I somewhat resent the idea that people can currently get online and gamble on esports, but not, online poker, which was something that I used to enjoy playing. That's a little bit of a double standard, and hopefully something that our government will rectify in the future and turn online poker back on. That issue notwithstanding, I don't know esports getting, quote unquote big. It seems like a long shot to me. I just can't see it having the traction that, sports betting, real sports, football, basketball, baseball. I can't see it having that kind of traction. I know it's quite popular in other countries. I mean, I've seen documentaries where they fill up stadiums in South Korea, kids going to watch these guys play StarCraft or whatever the hot game is at the time. And I know it's not a small thing here. There's certainly big conventions and events for e-gaming in the US. I know League of Legends has quite a large e-gaming following. But like I said, as far as e-gaming, esports betting, I can't imagine it's ever going to be a real serious thing.
So, in terms of earnings, according to www.esportsearnings.com, and I'm not going to speak to the veracity of this information, but it's at least, it's a starting point in terms of a discussion. We have players ranging from about 1.2 million total earnings down to maybe around 80 places later, around $250,000, and I believe this is in terms of total earnings rather than annually. But what this tells us is that there's certainly a lot of prize money being thrown around in these. Most of the actual game that they're playing, by the way, is Dota 2, which struck me as a little bit unexpectedly. But now, to put this into a different perspective, we have poker, which you mentioned. And now, not for nothing, but, we all know that poker went through, like, this boom phase over the last maybe decade of being televised on ESPN regularly and, actually having a viewership. But, you have people like Daniel Negreanu who have, according to PokerDB, have made close to $30 million throughout their poker playing career in prize money, so, and things like that. So we're not even talking about the gambling end of it. Now, just to put this in, another point of comparison, we have say something like a billiards player where in the top end they could maybe expect to pay to be paid about $250,000 in prize money and appearances and things like that. So, I think it's not necessarily huge, when you compare it to the bigger sports. Obviously, we all know the football and baseball players make, tens of millions of dollars a year. But then again, you have baseball players in Japan that are making like $500,000 a year. Sumo wrestlers make like $400,000 a year. So, it's something. The esports is something. It's got some kind of traction. I think what we're gonna, have to wait and see on is to what extent it really gains traction as a viewed audience. Now, I mean, we all know Twitch TV has been very popular, but, is this thing, putting esports on ESPN, is that going to take hold?
Well, you're talking about, what the actual competitors are making in prize money and whether or not there's going to be people viewing it, which I guess ultimately is what leads to the gambling aspect of it. But that's the heart of this question is will esports betting take off, I guess? Or at least that's a part of this question in reference to this unicorn.com esports betting website. And that's the part where I have a big question mark. Like, do people really want to gamble on the outcome of an esports game like they would on a football game or a basketball game?
A couple facts real quick just to kind of toss in to tie this together. League of Legends finale sold the Staples Center out in Los Angeles. And the Dota 2 tournament, the big one with the big prize, that sold out the Key Arena in Seattle. And then I just looked this up real quick, but we had someone last year, actually we had 5 people all playing Dota 2, that all 5 of them made over $1 million last year.
Wow, yeah. So the numbers are there. I mean, here, Joey Chestnut. Competitive eating made $218,000. People want to watch stuff. People do other stuff. And the range of things that people find interesting, particularly when there's a competition behind it, it's definitely going to be wide and varied. And, people at the top of their activities or sports, and I use the term loosely, at least if we're talking about competitive eating, they're going to make money off of it. As far as the gambling thing, now, I have a totally different perspective on this, and I think there's just a certain amount of people in, society that are, they're going to gamble on anything. And basically, if you give them a venue to place a bet, you'd be pretty surprised at the type of things they'd be willing to bet on.
They bet on competitive eating. That was an article because when Joey Chestnut came around, he unseated, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy that was famous before him for that.
As far as, just viewership of these events, e-gaming events, and, I'll go to poker again. I guess you could talk about other alternative sports, maybe bowling, or Bill mentioned billiards. Those are things that my dad might leave on TV because there's nothing else on. I can't imagine somebody like my dad leaving on a Dota 2 match. You know what I mean? How much can it catch on with the majority? And I guess younger people are becoming the majority slowly here, so maybe that's a moot point. But, currently, I think there's a pretty big audience that watch ESPN that are just not going to be interested in gaming, and it's probably going to take quite a while for it to mature and the people that grew up on gaming to become the vast majority of viewers.
What you just said actually makes me think it's going to become a lot bigger because the younger generation, let's say under 20, that play video games are so used to watching people play video games on things like Twitch or YouTube. And, my son is 5 and he'll sit, instead of playing a game, he'll watch a YouTube video of someone playing Disney Infinity.
Yeah, Twitch TV is obviously very popular, and, there are people that through sponsorships and donations and advertising, make a very generous income off of really just playing games on Twitch TV. And this isn't even competitively. This is, maybe they're good at it, maybe they have a good personality and they present themselves well, but in the end, all they're really doing is playing the game on Twitch TV and attracting viewership. Now, not for nothing, I mean, here we are, we're talking about gaming, so there's sort of this, money to be made or interest on the periphery in just being involved with gaming in any kind of level. So yeah, I do believe that it absolutely has a future, but of course, maybe I'm a little bit skeptical in the immediate present.
Let's move on. We've got a Windows 10 launch this summer, and Microsoft just broke the news that all Windows 7 or 8 users, those that do not have a pirated copy, those users are going to get a free upgrade to its latest OS. Sticking with what you have, or are you thinking you're going to give it a shot? Okay.
I never even installed or looked at Windows 8, for the record, so I'm still on 7. And yeah, I think I'd probably try Windows 10. I've looked at it a few times. It's just reviews from the early releases of it. It looks promising. I think they're in general Microsoft fashion of getting every other operating system right. I expect them to get this one right. That just seems to be the way that they've done it lately, at least for several of the last generations of operating systems. That said, yeah, it does look good from what I've seen, and I expect it to be a win, so I'm looking forward to it personally.
I've had a policy, ever since I've been involved with computers that basically I've been one generation behind whatever the current Microsoft operating system is. And I mean, we take this all the way back to DOS and, through every iteration of Windows, and it's pretty much held true for me. That said, I think I might actually jump on board. Number one, it's free, so there's, not exactly a monetary investment involved in doing this. Although there's certainly a potential time investment because, you'll have to install it and potentially patch it and everything else. And of course, if it goes south or it creates problems, I'm going to find myself very quickly wanting to roll back to Windows 7, and that'll be even more time spent in having to do that. I hate to say, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if that ends up being what happens. But I'm intrigued. I want to see what it's all about. I mean, they're talking about a lot of interesting features about it. They're going to, one of the main things is that it's going to be able to run Xbox games cross-platform, and I think that's something, really potentially huge, and I don't want to miss the bus on it.
Yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in. I've been doing some research on cross-platform gamings and why it doesn't exist. And this is really one of the bigger steps for that. The plan is for most Xbox games to be able to be played on the computer. Not the other way around. You're not going to be able to play PC games on your Xbox. And then there are a couple games, the biggest one being the next Fable game, that you are going to be able to play with people that are playing on their PC while you're in your Xbox. So it's exciting to me.
I should add to my previous statement that while I will probably get on board with Windows 10, I almost always wait for the first service pack release of a new operating system before I get it, so as to allow them to work out the bugs and, get all of the security holes fixed and everything. Basically what that means is I'm probably not going to be an early adopter, unless it looks really, really good. That said, your point about the Xbox games being playable on PC and intermingling the player base from computer and console games, I assume, is what would end up happening there. I wonder if that creates the dynamic for, quote-unquote unfair advantage. It's always been an argument that I've heard that you can't have a first-person shooter player on a keyboard and mouse playing in the same game as a first-person shooter player on a gamepad or controller. The keyboard and mouse is just too much faster, it's too big of an advantage, and it would end up dominating over the other players. Is that going to be, A, something that will possibly happen, and B, do you think it's actually a problem? I mean, I've gone to LAN centers and watched some kids play Halo on a gamepad, and it's ridiculous how good they are. I mean, they just, snap to their target and shoot them in the head in one shot. So I'm not sure if I believe that is the case anymore. Certainly it would be for me, I'm an old guy, I guess, technically speaking now, and I can't play a first-person shooter on a controller as well as I can on a keyboard and mouse, but maybe that's not the case for these young kids anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm about equivalent on both. I've probably spent more time playing on the controller, but I have to admit that I agree that it's easier with a keyboard and a mouse. It's just a little bit faster aiming and you're more, focused. But the people that have been playing on controllers on these first-person shooter games have been doing so for a very long time. I can't imagine that they're going to have a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to bet against them if push comes to shove, but, I agree, Guy. I'm also more comfortable on the keyboard and mouse, and for myself, it would absolutely be advantageous to use that. That said, you can use a controller with the PC, so I don't think it's going to necessarily be a transition problem, at least going in the other direction.
Yeah, but, how many people play Call of Duty or Battlefield on the PC with a controller? I've never heard of it. I suppose it happens, but, again, I used to have a LAN center literally across the street from my house. person that owned it and the people that worked there were generally friends of mine. So I spent a bit of time there, and I'd watch these kids play on Xbox 360s at the time when the center was open. And it was amazing how, they'd play with the controllers, and Halo 2 or Halo 3, I forget which version, was the big game at the time that they were playing. And, blew my mind. I didn't realize that people were getting that good with the controllers on the first-person shooters. It's not something that I ever became comfortable with personally.
If Microsoft does this, and certainly it's going to create an advantage for the Xbox, which, based on at least the sales to date, I think a lot of people view PlayStation and Sony as being at least the early winner in that race. I'm kind of thinking that this is going to potentially shift the momentum back towards the Xbox. I mean, being able to unify, at least on a certain level anyway, both gaming markets, PC and the Xbox platform, I feel like that's a good thing for them.
Yeah, I agree. There was some bright news for Xbox last month, or actually it was April, I believe, the sales figures came out, and it was the first month that Xbox had sold more consoles than PlayStation. So they definitely are not the early winners. Sony is. This could be at least a little bit of a boost. The problem is how well they're going to implement it. If they implement it like they implemented the Kinect and voice controls and all that, then it's definitely not going to help them.
Well, back to the actual subject here of, Windows 10 in general, not just the Xbox. Some of the other features that I've read about that are interesting, and I guess it is sort of related to the Xbox in that they're going to have the Cortana personal assistant, digital assistant, whatever they're going to be calling it, built into Windows 10. I thought that was kind of cool. I'm an iPhone user, and I like being able to just push the button, talk to Siri, ask her a question, and she spits back results. Hopefully the Cortana implementation is at least that effective, if not more so. There's some other cool features that I've read about that I'm looking forward to it. So all in all, like I said, I think it's going to be a win. And from what I've seen on Windows 8 being that goofy Metro interface, like they're fixing all of those complaints that people had.
Sounds good. Let's talk about it a little bit more in the fall after it is released. And for now, let's finish up our news segment with something we all enjoyed yesterday, in fact. The Heroes of the Storm, a MOBA by Blizzard, launched its open beta on Tuesday. We all played a couple matches, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more next week, which will be the week before it actually goes live. So just give the audience maybe a reason to play the game, Bill.
I mean, it's fun. That's the biggest reason to play the game. I think probably a lot of people, at least if you're interested in gaming, you're already familiar with the MOBA genre, and you've almost certainly seen League of Legends, which is, it's the giant in the gaming thing. Although, looking back to what the prize money was earlier, I would have thought it would have been League of Legends, but according to that list, it was Dota. But in any event, in terms of widespread popularity, League of Legends is really the giant to beat for Heroes of the Storm. And I'm not going to predict whether or not they're going to succeed in doing that. They've made a nice product, though. Number one, they're relying on their own sort of mythology, so from the Warcraft, the StarCraft, the Diablo 3 universe, the overall Diablo universe. They're pulling a lot of the characters from that. So any fans of the Blizzard game are going to be instantly familiar with the cast of characters that you can play. And secondly, the game is really very highly polished and well done, both during closed beta and now during the open beta. It's, has an elegance to it. It's simpler to grasp and kind of get into than League of Legends. So maybe someone who is maybe intimidated by League of Legends in terms of getting better at it and growing at it and learning at it, this is going to have an easier learning curve, I'm pretty sure. And at the same time, they have introduced a little bit more variety with the early map releases. I think it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's interesting you say it was maybe a little more accessible to new users. I'm, somewhat experienced playing MOBA games. I've played a whole lot of League of Legends. I was downright confused as to what I was supposed to be doing in the handful of matches that I played on it yesterday in regards to what the game mode is. I mean, there was, I don't even know, one map where you were trying to get a ship to shoot cannonballs for you, and another map you're trying to control temples. It's not just the standard 3 lanes, kill the towers, get to the nexus kind of thing that League of Legends is. There are aspects of it that are simpler. There's no buying gear for your characters as you level up through the course of the game. You just pick your abilities or talents, I think is what they call them, as you level up. That's certainly going to be easier, I think, for the average person to learn. So yes and no. I agree and disagree with you on whether or not it's going to be more accessible. I haven't figured it all out yet myself. That said, it was fun. I liked the variety of characters, and the game was certainly polished. I know when we first jumped into it, me and John were talking like, why are we moving so slow? That felt a little weird. It didn't feel as quick and nimble as some other games. But definitely, my initial impressions are that I think I'm going to enjoy it. I don't know if I'm going to find it to be a better or not than League of Legends, which is the basis for which I think almost all of these games are compared to at this point. But, everyone should give it a try.
Yeah, everyone, it is free. The game works like this. Every week you get free heroes to play. You acquire gold, which you can use to buy more heroes or costumes for those heroes or whatever. So even if you are not looking to spend a single dollar, you can definitely still enjoy the game. And the way to get on that before June 2nd, which is the official launch date, is to go to Blizzard.com and sign in with your Blizzard account or create one. Sign yourself up for the open beta, and then it'll let you download it from there. But you do have to sign up on the website for the open beta before you can do that.
And now for our feature.
Let's move on to our segment today. We're going to talk a little bit about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This came out last September, maybe even late August. So it's a little bit late, but there was an April launch of a program called Fantasy Grounds on Steam. Users of that game can play authentic Dungeons & Dragons with friends over the internet. Well, this is not a new idea, or even a new application of an idea. It is new that it is available on Steam. This coincides with, again, the fall of last year release of the rule set. So, first off, guys, what pros and cons are there to the new rule set that you can explain to those of us that are unfamiliar with the changes? Guy?
For me, it really brought D&D back to the heart of what I always felt like the game was. That's a social adventure game that focused on exploration and role-playing, and thrilling combat encounters, and it, brought back the idea that tabletop gaming, at least for RPGs, wasn't the exact same thing as tactical miniature combat games like Warhammer. In 3rd edition or 3.5 rule set, it was very hinged on moving figures around the proverbial grid, battle map or whatever. And they really went back and reinforced the idea that this can be a game that takes place in the theater of the mind. And ultimately, for me, that's the biggest pro. The rules are simpler. There's fewer feats. There's more interesting class options right out of the gate, and it's not reliant on, all of the other extra rules that really clogged and bloated up the old system. To be fair, I never tried 4th edition. I should probably throw that out there. All I heard was negative about it. So most of my experience that I'm talking about from the past is coming from 3rd and 3.5. That said, it's really a huge win for me in that it's fun again, it's simpler, it's more accessible, it's really, everything they did with it, I think, was a major improvement.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Just a couple of quick points of clarification, because I'm not sure if it was made very clear when we started this discussion. The application that we're talking about isn't a video game. This Dungeons & Dragons Fantasy Grounds, number one, it's a Wizards of the Coast product, or at least Wizards of the Coast endorsed, and selling it on Steam is really just another way of getting it out there. But we're not talking about a video game here. We're talking about essentially, sort of like a meeting application that affords you to be able to play classic, Dungeons & Dragons tabletop through the computer interface and over the internet. And then the other thing, of course, is we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and the impact that it's had on the latest kind of iteration of the D&D universe and the rule set. I totally agree with you. I'm a big fan of 5th edition. You mentioned the key word there, bloat. It got rid of the bloat of 3.5. It got rid of the bloat of Pathfinder. And, just as a quick acknowledgement, D&D isn't the only game system out there, right? I mean, you could go to your local game store and probably find a dozen different game systems that, probably, at least in some way, all pay tribute to the original D&D system, and the use of the 20-sided die as the core of that. But that said, this is a new version of the game. They've really slimmed it down. They've made it a lot more elegant. The rule systems are a lot easier to digest, even if maybe the writing of the books isn't the greatest thing in the world. But it's a lot more approachable. It's a lot more easy to manage. You look back at D&D 4th edition, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the motivation behind that design was to make it friendly to make computer games about. And again, now I'm making this distinction again. We're talking about the difference between an application that lets you play an RPG with friends and an actual computer game. 4th edition was designed to be computer game friendly, and unfortunately what that did is it made it unfriendly to the tabletop application of it. 5th edition is something I'm excited to be taking part in the very near future.
Yeah, I think not only was 4th edition geared to be friendly to game developers to use the rule set to build games, perhaps, but I think it was also supposed to be appealing to somebody that's never played Dungeons and Dragons pen and paper at a tabletop, but has a lot of experience playing MMOs and computer role-playing games. It was supposed to attract that kind of player. And, again, in this 5th edition of the rule set, they really went back to their roots and said, all right, here's what D&D is all about. And, they just went back to that, and like I said, I love it. There are some downsides. Bill had mentioned that the books not being well laid out. I think that's, a big hit against this is the books are well written. They're not well organized. If I'm in the middle of a game session and somebody says, oh, what was that rule on 2-weapon fighting? It is not as, simple, just reference it, as it was in almost every previous iteration of the Dungeons & Dragons handbooks that I've owned. You got to search for stuff a little more. There's not ample statistics and tables that you would expect them all grouped together so that you can easily look up and reference, anything you need to know at any given time. That's just not there in this edition, which is my big hit against it. But I get over it, mainly because I think it's a little easier to memorize everything, and I find myself having to look up stuff less often. And like I said, it's so much better than the previous editions that I'm willing to deal with that small annoyance.
What do you think about the Fantasy Grounds program? I don't know if either of you tried it. I just kind of looked at it and kind of watched a video. The basic model that they're trying to get you to do is subscribe, which is $9.99 a month, and then you get all their content as long as you're a subscriber. Alternatively, you can buy things individually, but there's $1,200 worth of things you could buy individually as downloadable content for it. So, the subscription is reasonable, maybe, but if you're getting it a la carte, it's kind of pricey. Do you think that you would like to use this program when you're doing an online campaign, or would you use one of the free options that maybe you've used before? Bill?
So it's funny you bring this up because Guy and I were actually in the last couple of weeks talking about running a D campaign using this exact application. The $9.99 a month thing, it's not per player. It's basically for the entire group. So that affords you the DM client and as many user clients as your bandwidth will allow. So it's really kind of, it seems like a really good option. We used, Roll20.net for a while just to give them some free advertising for both of our listeners. And, I think it was challenging in the regard that for that sort of product, you had to manually enter all of your applicable data. So it was a shell. It was basically, exterior of a database that allowed you to input the information and then use it and manage it within the confines of the game, and it did that very well. This new product, and I haven't used it yet, but I've read about it quite a bit and looked into it on the website. The real selling point for me is that it's going to allow the immediate import of whatever rule set you're going to use. So if we're going to run our campaign in 5th edition rule set, it lets you import everything directly. So no more, individually typing in all the stats and numbers for any given monster that you might be running in that night's adventure. Rather, you just, point and click, drag and drop, and everything's already there. Including it already has the character sheets imported. So like the last time that we played D&D in this kind of format using Roll20.net, we had to basically, have everybody roll up and draw up their character sheets outside of the application and maintain that information separately. Maybe a little bit more akin to what we're used to doing on the tabletop, except with this application, with Fantasy Grounds, essentially the characters are going to be rolled up and done within the confines of the application itself. It makes everything a lot more connected. Maybe for some people a little too much like it's becoming a video game, but again, really, it's just managing the session.
Yeah, Bill's really covered that one. There's not a whole lot I can add, but I will say the last game I ran, which was an online game, people playing, we were communicating over Ventrilo, and everyone was dispersed across the country. I did it on Roll20.net, and the setup was very time consuming for me to get my campaign ready for everyone to play. I was spending, the better part of 4 or 5 hours just getting ready for the game session, drawing up the maps, bringing in all the monster and enemy statistics, getting everything set up. I haven't used Fantasy Grounds yet either. I've just looked at it, but one of the cool things is they seem to have a certain number of the pre-built adventure modules already created and built into the system if you want to pay for them or if you're a subscriber. As a matter of fact, I was looking at their website just yesterday or the day before, and they had just put in Horde of the Dragon Queen, which is the first adventure module for the Tyranny of Dragons adventure storyline. Which I ran in a live game. It was a fun module. So, that's a 90-some page module, if I'm not mistaken, and that's already all built into this system. I assume all of the maps, all of the monsters, all of the statistics, everything you need to get going is just there and ready for the Dungeon Master to take advantage of without having to spend all that time setting up prior to this gaming session. So, that's really appealing. I think a lot of people really would like that and enjoy that, and it makes it so that you can run a game more frequently without, the Dungeon Master wanting to blow his brains out because of all the setup time he's going to have to spend every single week.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like an easier option. It sounds like the way to go. Bill, I think that's a great point that you just need one subscription and you can share it. So that definitely makes it much more affordable. We may have some listeners today that have maybe never played a traditional game of Dungeons & Dragons. What would you say to encourage them to give it a shot with the new rule set or maybe with the ease of running Fantasy Grounds? Okay.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of people out there that have A, never played Dungeons & Dragons, or B, any role-playing game, a traditional tabletop role-playing game. I would say it doesn't have to be D&D 5th edition, although it's a great choice. Like I said, the rule set is easy. Bill's playing a game with some friends. I think he said that there's several new players that have never played before. And, it's understandable when it's accessible to everyone and anyone, but it doesn't have to be Dungeons & Dragons. There's other good games out there, different themes that aren't necessarily medieval fantasy. For example, a system that I love is called Shadowrun. I believe it's on the 5th edition, and that's set in a cyberpunk futuristic world where you play a character that basically does generally, but not always, illegal activities, quote unquote shadow running, as it's called. That's another fun game system. But the point is that they're social games that get you, away from your computer screen and, playing with friends in an environment that's a little bit more similar to family game night and, ordering pizza and having sodas and hanging out and having fun. that you don't really get from playing a computer game. So, I'd say jump in there and try it, even if you've never done it before. It's a lot of fun, and it's a good bonding experience.
Yeah, I think the only real limitation to somebody who's never played is having access to other people who play it. I mean, it's most fun to do with your actual friends. So even if you're a total D&D noob and none of your friends have done it, I would encourage people to give it a shot and, to get together and try it. It's basically you're just hanging out, and it's an activity to do while you're hanging out. And maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it. It's perhaps an acquired taste, but it's not exactly an unpopular one.
Okay, well, it sounds like, there's a lot of good changes. There's an ease of access program. The rules are different. So, maybe everyone, if you get the opportunity, give it a shot. See if it's something you might enjoy. We're going to wrap things up for today, for this week. Next week, we are going to do a longer breakdown of Here's the Storm. It's not going to be a tutorial, but maybe a beginner's guide or something like that, something a little different for the podcast. And of course, we're going to cover the news. That is all for today. As always, thank you so much for listening to our podcast, the Nerd Goblin Podcast. This is episode 3 that you've listened to. You can follow us right now on SoundCloud, and I believe probably by the time you can listen to this podcast, you're going to be able to follow us on iTunes as well. On SoundCloud, you can get the RSS feed for the podcast and get our weekly updates in whatever podcast playing software that you use. And, leave us a review. Like us on SoundCloud, follow us, tell your friends about the podcast. We're just getting started, but we like to think that we're getting better every episode, and if there's something that you think we can improve on, please let us know. nerdgoblin@gmail.com. Thank you.